I was standing at my kitchen window watching three goats chase each other around the newly installed electric fence when the doorbell rang like someone was trying to break their finger off pressing it. Opening the door, I found myself face to face with a woman in her mid-40s wearing a pressed white blouse, pearl necklace, and an expression that could curdle milk. Her blonde hair was cut in that aggressive bob that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and she clutched a leather-bound clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Are you Samuel Irving?" she demanded before I could even say hello. "That's me," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "And you are Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to discuss the massive violation you've created on your property." She gestured dramatically toward my backyard, like I had built a nuclear reactor back there. I glanced over at the half-acre plot I'd been working on for the past month. The electric fence gleamed in the morning sun, surrounding a tidy area where my three goats, two alpacas, and a handful of chickens were living their best lives. Everything was clean, organized, and completely legal according to Larimer County, Colorado zoning laws. "What violation?" I asked, genuinely confused. Patricia's face flushed red. "The livestock, the fencing, the entire agricultural operation you've constructed without HOA approval. This is a residential neighborhood, Mr. Irving, not a farm. Actually, this property is zoned agricultural by the county. I checked before I moved in 6 months ago. I'm allowed to keep livestock on any property over 1 acre, and I have 2 acres here. Everything's properly permitted through the county." She thrust a piece of paper at me. "I don't care what the county says. Our HOA covenants clearly state that all exterior modifications require board approval. You've violated Section 14, Paragraph C of our community guidelines." I took the paper and scanned it quickly. It was a formal notice demanding I remove all livestock and the electric fence within 14 days or face daily fines of $200. "I'll need to look into this," I said. When I bought the house, the seller and the title company confirmed there were no HOA restrictions that would prevent agricultural use. That was specifically written into my purchase agreement. "Well, Mr. Irving, you were misinformed. I'll expect compliance within the stated time frame." Patricia turned on her heel and marched back to her silver BMW, parked in my driveway, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper that was about to turn my life upside down for the next few months. I walked back inside and immediately pulled out the massive folder of documents from my home purchase. My real estate agent, Tom, had assured me multiple times that while yes, there was technically an HOA for the subdivision, it was mostly inactive, and the county zoning superseded any HOA rules when it came to agricultural use. The development had been built on what used to be farmland, and several properties had been specifically designated as agricultural parcels to maintain the rural character. Sure enough, buried in my title documents was a specific addendum noting that lots over 1 acre maintained their agricultural zoning designation and were exempt from certain HOA restrictions. I took pictures of the relevant pages with my phone and then called Tom. "Samuel, how's the new place?" Tom's cheerful voice came through. "Been better. HOA president just showed up threatening fines over my livestock setup." There was a pause. "That's impossible. Your lot has agricultural zoning. The HOA can't override county zoning laws." "It's right there in black and white in your purchase documents." That's what I thought, but she seemed pretty confident, said I violated their covenants by not getting approval. "Listen, I know a good property attorney, Brenda Matthews. She handles this kind of thing all the time." "Want me to send you her number?" "Yeah, that would be great." Within an hour, I had an appointment scheduled with Brenda for the next afternoon. In the meantime, I decided to do some digging on Patricia Henderson and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. A quick search on the county property records showed that Patricia lived 4 houses down from me in a massive 5,000-square-foot McMansion. She'd been on the HOA board for 7 years and president for the last 3. Looking through the HOA's public filings, I found a pattern that made my stomach sink. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had filed over 40 violation notices against various residents, resulting in thousands of dollars in fines. The violation notices ranged from lawns being a 1/4 inch too tall to unauthorized paint colors to basketball hoops in driveways. I also found a local Facebook group called Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners that wasn't affiliated with the HOA. Scrolling through recent posts, I saw I wasn't the first person to have problems with Patricia. Multiple residents complained about overzealous enforcement, arbitrary rule interpretation, and what several people claimed were personal vendettas disguised as HOA business. One post from a guy named Marcus Thompson particularly caught my attention. He'd been fined $1,500 for installing a vegetable garden in his front yard that Patricia claimed violated the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. Marcus had eventually removed the garden rather than continue fighting. I sent Marcus a private message explaining my situation and asking if he'd be willing to chat. He responded within minutes, and we set up a time to meet at a local coffee shop that evening. The rest of the day, I took care of my animals and documented everything. I photographed the entire livestock area from multiple angles, showing how clean and well-maintained everything was. The electric fence was a professional installation, properly grounded and clearly marked with warning signs. The animal shelter was a neat structure I'd built from treated lumber, with proper ventilation and drainage. The whole setup probably looked better than half the yards in the neighborhood. My goats, Pepper, Salt, and Paprika, were particularly photogenic as they posed on top of their wooden climbing structure. The alpacas, Fernando and Diego, stood by the fence looking majestic as hell. Even the chickens seemed to cooperate, pecking around their coop area instead of causing chaos like they usually did in the mornings. That evening, I met Marcus at The Grind, a coffee shop in downtown Fort Collins. He was in his early 30s with tired eyes and a frustrated demeanor that I was starting to recognize as the Patricia Henderson effect. "Thanks for meeting me," I said as we settled into a corner booth with our coffees. "No problem. When I saw your message about livestock, I knew exactly what you were dealing with." Marcus wrapped his hands around his mug. "Patricia lost her mind when I planted tomatoes and zucchini in my front yard, said it made the neighborhood look agricultural in a negative way. The irony isn't lost on me that you actually have agriculture, and she's even more furious. Did you fight the fines?" "For a while. I brought evidence that other HOAs in Colorado had lost court cases over vegetable garden bans. But my wife was pregnant, I was working 60-hour weeks, and Patricia just kept escalating. She'd drive by my house multiple times a day, document every tiny violation she could dream up. My grass was too long, then too short. My mailbox needed painting. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 10 minutes after trash pickup. It was endless harassment. So you caved. I removed the garden and paid the fines. Wasn't worth the stress." Marcus looked at me seriously. "But your situation is different. You actually have legal protections I didn't have. Agricultural zoning trumps HOA rules in Colorado. That's established case law." "That's what my real estate agent said. I've got a lawyer appointment tomorrow." "Good. because Patricia won't back down easily. She views herself as the guardian of property values. In her mind, anything that doesn't look like it belongs in a country club magazine is a threat to everyone's investment. We talked for another hour, and Marcus introduced me via text to 3 other neighbors who'd had problems with Patricia and the HOA board. By the time I left, I had a much clearer picture of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just about my fence and animals. This was about a power-hungry HOA president who'd been running roughshod over residents for years, and apparently, I'd become her newest target. The next afternoon, I sat in Brenda Matthews' office in Old Town, Fort Collins, surrounded by law books and framed certificates. Brenda was in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. "All right, let's see what we've got," she said, flipping through the documents I'd brought. She spent a good 20 minutes reading in silence, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. Finally, she looked up. "This is actually pretty straightforward. Your property has an agricultural zoning designation from Larimer County. Colorado state law is very clear that county zoning regulations supersede HOA restrictions when there's a conflict. The HOA can't ban something the county explicitly permits. So, I can just ignore the violation notice. Not quite that simple. The HOA could still file a lien against your property for unpaid fines if you don't respond appropriately. But here's what we're going to do." Brenda pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. "First, I'll draft a response letter citing the specific Colorado statutes and case law that protect your rights. We'll reference your agricultural zoning, the county permits you obtained, and the purchase agreement addendum that explicitly preserves agricultural use. Second, we'll request copies of all HOA board meeting minutes and financial records under Colorado's HOA disclosure laws. I have a feeling this isn't the first time they've overstepped their authority, and I want to see the pattern. How much is this going to cost me? My initial consultation and the response letter will run you $500. If they persist and we need to go to court, we're looking at significantly more. But honestly, most HOAs back down once they realize a homeowner has actual legal representation and knows their rights." "You don't know Patricia Henderson?" Brenda smiled. "Oh, but I do. I've handled 3 other cases involving Meadowbrook Estates over the past 5 years. 2 settled before trial, 1 resulted in a judgment against the HOA. Patricia was president for that one too. They had to pay my client's attorney fees plus damages. This was news to me. What was that case about? Selective enforcement. The HOA was fining one homeowner for having a recreational vehicle in their driveway while ignoring identical violations by board members and their friends. Judge wasn't amused. I left Brenda's office feeling more confident, but also aware that this could turn into an expensive, time-consuming battle. I'd moved to Colorado specifically to have space for a small homestead. I'd worked in software development for 10 years, saved aggressively, and finally achieved my dream of a place where I could raise some animals, grow food, and live a quieter life while working remotely. The idea that someone could take that away over HOA politics was infuriating. 3 days later, Patricia received Brenda's response letter via certified mail. I know this because she showed up at my house at 7 in the morning the day after signing for it, practically vibrating with rage. "This is outrageous," she shouted before I'd even fully opened the door. "You're threatening to sue the HOA. I'm not threatening anything. I'm responding to your violation notice with legal facts. My livestock area is legal under county zoning, which supersedes HOA authority. That's not how this works." Every homeowner agreed to our covenants when they purchased their property. You don't just get to ignore rules because they are inconvenient. I'm not ignoring rules. I'm following county law, which takes precedence. This is settled Colorado case law. Patricia's face had gone from red to almost purple. This neighborhood has standards, Mr. Irving. Standards that protect everyone's property values. Your little farm is bringing down prices for all of us. You have evidence of that. Because I'd love to see how 3 goats and 2 alpacas have tanked the real estate market. Don't be smart with me. The HOA board is meeting tomorrow night and will be discussing further action against you. You're making a huge mistake fighting this. The meeting's at 7, right? At the community center. I'll be there. That seemed to catch her off guard. It's a closed board meeting. Actually, under Colorado law, HOA board meetings have to be open to all homeowners unless you're discussing personnel or legal matters. I have a right to attend and address the board during the homeowner comment period. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Finally, she spun around and stalked back to her BMW without another word. I texted Marcus immediately about the meeting. Within an hour, he'd mobilized 5 other homeowners who'd had issues with Patricia's HOA enforcement. We coordinated to all show up at the meeting the next night. The Meadowbrook Estates Community Center was a small building at the entrance to the subdivision, mostly used for holiday parties and garage sale organizing. When I arrived at 6:45 the next evening, Patricia was already there setting up a projector and arranging papers at a table at the front of the room. 2 other board members were with her. A thin, nervous-looking man she introduced as Howard Chen, the treasurer, and a heavy-set woman named Deborah Wu, the secretary. I didn't realize we'd have such an audience, Patricia said icily as Marcus and the other homeowners filed in behind me. Just exercising our rights to attend board meetings, I said pleasantly, taking a seat in the front row. The meeting started promptly at 7. Patricia went through standard business first: approval of last month's minutes, financial report, discussion of upcoming landscaping for common areas. Everything was normal and boring until we reached new business. Item 7, Patricia announced. Ongoing violation at 2847 Meadowbrook Lane. That was my address. The board needs to discuss escalated enforcement action against Mr. Samuel Irving for his refusal to comply with our 14-day notice to remove unauthorized livestock and fencing. I'd like to address the board, I said, standing up. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't without obviously violating meeting procedures. Fine. You have 3 minutes. I walked to the front of the room and pulled out my folder. Thank you. I want to make several points clear for the record. First, my property is zoned agricultural by Larimer County. Here are the official zoning documents. I held them up. Second, I obtained all required permits from the county before installing the livestock area. Here are those permits. Third, Colorado revised statutes, specifically Section 3833.3106, establishes that county zoning regulations take precedence over HOA restrictions when they conflict. The Colorado Court of Appeals affirmed this in the Thompson v. Whispering Pines HOA case in 2019. Howard, the treasurer, looked uncomfortable. Did we know about the agricultural zoning when we sent the violation notice? The zoning is irrelevant, Patricia snapped. Our covenants require approval for any exterior modifications. He didn't get approval. Actually, my purchase agreement contains a specific addendum stating that agricultural use is permitted on parcels over 1 acre without additional HOA approval. The developer included this when the subdivision was created specifically to preserve some agricultural character in the neighborhood. The title company confirmed this before closing. I handed copies to each board member. Deborah, the secretary, read through the documents with increasing concern. Patricia, did you review the purchase agreement addendum before sending the violation notice? I reviewed the covenants, which are what matter. But if his purchase agreement specifically exempts agricultural use, he's running a farm in a residential neighborhood. Look at this. Patricia clicked her remote, and the projector lit up with photos of my property. She'd apparently driven by multiple times to document every angle of the livestock area. This is what people see when they drive past his house. Goats, alpacas, chickens. This isn't what people expect in Meadowbrook Estates. One of the homeowners behind me, a woman named Jennifer, spoke up. I live next to Samuel. His property looks great. It's way better maintained than the vacant lot on the other side of me that's full of weeds. That's not the point, Patricia said. Then what is the point? Marcus stood up. Because it seems like you're selectively enforcing rules based on personal preference, which is exactly what got the HOA sued 3 years ago. Patricia's expression turned cold. Mr. Thompson, you're out of order. Am I? Because I'd love to know why board member Steve Morrison has had a boat in his driveway for 6 months in violation of the parking restrictions, but somehow he's never gotten a violation notice. Howard and Deborah exchanged glances. This was clearly news to them. This is getting off topic, Patricia said loudly. We're here to discuss Mr. Irving's violations, which aren't actually violations, I interjected. I've provided documentation showing that my livestock area is legal under county zoning and explicitly permitted under my purchase agreement. If the HOA continues pursuing fines or enforcement action, my attorney is prepared to file a motion for declaratory judgment with the court. Based on the precedent cases, the HOA would likely be ordered to pay my attorney fees in addition to any damages. The room was quiet for a moment. Finally, Howard cleared his throat. I think we should table this discussion and have our HOA attorney review the documentation Mr. Irving has provided. I don't want to expose the association to legal liability if we're on shaky ground here. We are not on shaky ground, Patricia insisted. Our covenants are clear. Our covenants don't trump state law or county zoning, Deborah said quietly. I think Howard's right. We should get a legal opinion before proceeding. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue more, but even she could see she was losing the room. Fine. We'll table this until next month's meeting pending legal review. But this isn't over, Mr. Irving. I nodded politely. I look forward to your attorney's opinion. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, and I walked out with Marcus and the other homeowners. We stood in the parking lot for a while, comparing notes and stories about Patricia's enforcement tactics. That went better than I expected, Marcus said. But don't underestimate her. She's going to look for any angle she can find. He was right, of course. Over the next 3 weeks, Patricia drove past my house at least twice a day, sometimes more. She was clearly looking for any violation she could document. My grass height, my garbage can placement, whether my car was parked straight in the driveway. I started documenting her drive-bys with my doorbell camera, creating a log of what was starting to feel like harassment. Then things escalated. I came home from a grocery run one afternoon to find one of my goats, Pepper, limping badly. Examination revealed a nasty cut on her leg that looked like she'd gotten tangled in something. But looking at the fence line, I couldn't figure out what she'd caught herself on. Everything was intact and properly maintained. 2 days later, I woke up to find someone had disconnected the power to my electric fence overnight. The fence itself wasn't damaged, but the energizer had been unplugged from the outdoor outlet. Nothing else was disturbed, and there was no sign of forced entry anywhere on my property. I called the Larimer County Sheriff's Office and filed a report. A deputy came out, took photos, and documented everything. He also reviewed my doorbell camera footage, which showed a figure in dark clothing approaching my backyard around 2 in the morning. The video quality wasn't good enough to identify who it was, but you could see them crouching by the fence energizer before leaving. This is technically trespassing and possibly vandalism or attempted theft, the deputy said. But without a clear identification, there's not much we can do beyond documenting it. I'd recommend installing additional cameras with better night vision coverage. I took his advice and spent the next day installing 4 new security cameras covering every angle of my property. I also changed the outlet for the fence energizer to one that required a key to access the breaker. 3 days after that, I received a complaint notice from Larimer County Animal Control. Someone had filed a report claiming my livestock were being neglected, weren't provided adequate water, and that my electric fence was dangerous to neighborhood children. The animal control officer, a friendly guy named Derek, came out to investigate. He spent an hour inspecting the entire setup, checking the animal's health, reviewing my water and feed systems, and testing the fence voltage. "Everything looks great here," he said finally. "Your animals are well cared for, you've got proper shelter and water, and the electric fence is clearly marked with warning signs. It's also well within legal voltage limits. Honestly, this is one of the better small livestock setups I've seen. Can you tell me who filed the complaint?" Complaint was anonymous, but the address listed for callback was. He checked his tablet. Patricia Henderson, 2803 Meadowbrook Lane, said she was reporting on behalf of concerned neighbors. Of course it was. Derek filled out his report, clearing me of all allegations, and left. I immediately forwarded the report to Brenda, my attorney, along with the video of someone tampering with my fence and the documentation of Patricia's constant drive-bys. "This is bordering on harassment," Brenda said when I called her. "The false animal control report is particularly concerning. That's a misuse of county resources and could potentially be criminal depending on what she said in the complaint. I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter." Will that actually stop her? It'll put her on notice that her actions are documented and that we're prepared to pursue legal action for harassment if it continues. Sometimes that's enough to make people back off. The cease and desist letter went out the next day. Patricia's response was to file a new HOA violation notice, this time claiming my fence wasn't the right color and violated the community's aesthetic standards. The fence was brown, the same color as thousands of other electric fences across Colorado. But according to Patricia's new violation notice, the HOA had a rule that all fencing must be either white vinyl or natural wood. Electric fencing wasn't on the approved list. "She's making things up now," I told Brenda on the phone. "Probably. But we need to respond appropriately." "Do you have a copy of the actual HOA covenants that were recorded when you purchased the property?" I dug through my files and found them. Reading through the fence section, it specified that decorative fencing in front yards and side yards must be either white vinyl or natural wood. But there was nothing about backyard fencing, utility fencing, or agricultural fencing. Brenda drafted another response letter pointing out the specific covenant language and noting that electric livestock fencing was clearly utility/agricultural fencing, not decorative fencing subject to those restrictions. She also included a paragraph documenting the pattern of harassment and warning that we were prepared to seek legal remedies if it continued. By this point, it was mid-December, and the next HOA board meeting was scheduled for early January. Howard, the treasurer, called me a few days before Christmas with surprising news. "I wanted to give you a heads up," he said, sounding tired. "The HOA attorney reviewed all your documentation. His opinion is that we don't have grounds to enforce against your livestock area due to the agricultural zoning and your purchase agreement addendum. He recommended we drop the matter entirely." That's good news. It should be. But Patricia's refusing to accept it. She's insisting we pursue it anyway. Deborah and I are considering resigning from the board. This isn't what we signed up for. We thought we'd be organizing garage sales and approving paint colors, not getting into legal battles over stuff the HOA has no authority over. I appreciate you letting me know. Look, I'll be honest with you. Patricia has some personal issues with anything that reminds her of rural life. Her family lost their farm when she was a teenager, some foreclosure situation, and she's got this thing about maintaining suburban standards. It's not about your property specifically. It's about control and her own baggage. That was interesting context, but it didn't change the situation. Patricia's personal issues weren't my problem, and they definitely didn't give her the right to harass me or misuse the HOA. The January board meeting was tense from the start. Howard and Deborah had both resigned, leaving Patricia as the only board member present. Technically, this meant the board didn't have a quorum and couldn't conduct official business, but Patricia pressed ahead anyway. "The board has reviewed the HOA attorney's opinion regarding 2847 Meadowbrook Lane," she announced to the room of about 15 homeowners. "While the attorney believes county zoning may present challenges, we have a responsibility to enforce our covenants. Therefore, I'm moving forward with escalated fines against Mr. Irving." "You can't do that," I said. "You don't have a quorum. You can't take board action without at least 2 board members present." "I'm invoking my emergency powers as president," Marcus laughed out loud. "Emergency powers. This isn't Star Wars. The HOA bylaws don't give you unilateral authority." Several other homeowners spoke up, pointing out that Patricia was clearly overstepping her authority. The meeting devolved into chaos, with Patricia trying to maintain control while multiple people challenged her on procedural grounds. Finally, Jennifer, my neighbor, stood up. "I move for a vote of no confidence in Patricia Henderson as HOA president." "That's not on the agenda," Patricia snapped. "According to our bylaws, any homeowner can introduce a motion during the new business section of a board meeting," Jennifer said. She'd clearly done her homework. "I'm introducing this motion now. Do I have a second?" "Seconded," Marcus called out immediately. The vote was 16-1, with Patricia being the only vote in her favor. She was officially removed as HOA president, and the meeting elected Jennifer as interim president until proper elections could be held in March. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I came home from a morning hike to find all of my chickens dead in their coop. They hadn't been attacked by a predator. They'd been poisoned. The remaining feed in their container had blue-green pellets mixed in that definitely weren't chicken feed. I called the sheriff's office immediately. This time, they sent out a detective named Sarah Martinez in addition to a regular deputy. I showed them the security footage from the night before, which clearly captured a figure in a dark hooded jacket entering my property around 3 in the morning, approaching the chicken coop, and leaving 10 minutes later. "Can you identify who that is?" Detective Martinez asked. "The video's not clear enough for a positive ID, but look at this." I pulled up footage from the same camera during the day, showing Patricia Henderson standing in almost the exact same spot, wearing the exact same jacket, during one of her drive-by surveillance sessions. "That's circumstantial, but it's something," Martinez said. "We'll need to investigate further. Do you know of anyone who might want to harm your animals or property?" I explained the entire situation. The HOA dispute, the harassment, the false animal control report, the fence tampering, and Patricia's removal from the board. Martinez took detailed notes and collected samples of the poisoned feed. "I'm treating this as criminal mischief and animal cruelty," she said. "Given the value of the animals and the apparent poisoning, those are both felonies in Colorado. I'll be following up with Miss Henderson." Over the next week, Detective Martinez conducted a thorough investigation. She interviewed Patricia, who initially denied even knowing where I lived, which was obviously absurd given the months of HOA disputes. When confronted with evidence of her constant presence near my property, Patricia changed her story to claim she was just monitoring covenant violations as part of her HOA duties. The breakthrough came when Martinez executed a search warrant on Patricia's house. In her garage, they found a bag of rat poison that exactly matched the pellets found in my chicken feed. They also found a notebook where Patricia had been documenting my daily routines, including what times I usually left the house and returned. Patricia was arrested and charged with criminal mischief, animal cruelty, and stalking. The stalking charge was based on the documented pattern of surveillance, the drive-bys, and the notebook full of my personal information and schedule. The case moved relatively quickly through the court system. Patricia initially tried to fight the charges, but the evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, the matching poison, the notebook, and the documented history of escalating harassment all painted a clear picture. Her attorney eventually convinced her to take a plea deal. In March, Patricia Henderson pleaded guilty to misdemeanor stalking and felony animal cruelty. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail, 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for my chickens and all legal fees I'd incurred defending against the HOA violations. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The criminal charges aside, the civil case was settled quickly once Patricia's criminal behavior came to light. The HOA, under new leadership with Jennifer as president, officially withdrew all violation notices against my property and issued a written acknowledgement that my livestock area was legal and permitted under county zoning. They also paid Brenda's attorney fees and issued an apology letter. But the most satisfying outcome came from the other homeowners. Once Patricia was removed and people felt safe speaking up, stories flooded out about years of harassment, arbitrary fines, and selective enforcement. The new HOA board launched an internal review and ended up refunding over $30,000 in improperly assessed fines to various homeowners. Marcus got his money back from the vegetable garden dispute. Jennifer was refunded fines for a mailbox that was supposedly the wrong style. Another neighbor got money back from a fine about Christmas decorations being up too long. The list went on and on. As spring arrived, I rebuilt my chicken coop and got 6 new hens. Fernando and Diego, my alpacas, were thriving, and their wool was coming in beautifully. The goats were as mischievous as ever, though I'd learned to secure everything within a 50-foot radius of them, or it would end up knocked over or partially eaten. I was out in the livestock area one Saturday morning in April when Jennifer stopped by with her daughter, Emma, who was about 8 years old. "Hope you don't mind us dropping in," Jennifer said. "Emma's been asking to see the alpacas for weeks." "Not at all. Come on back." Emma's face lit up when she saw Fernando and Diego. "They're so fluffy. Can I pet them?" "Sure, just move slowly and let them come to you." We spent 20 minutes with the animals while Emma asked 100 questions about what they ate, where they came from, and whether they spit like the llamas at the zoo. It was a good reminder of why I'd wanted this life in the first place. After years of staring at computer screens in a cramped apartment, having space and animals and the ability to teach a kid about livestock was exactly what I'd been looking for. "Thanks for not giving up when Patricia was making everything difficult," Jennifer said as we walked back toward the driveway. "A lot of people would have just removed the animals and moved on. But you standing up to her gave the rest of us courage to speak up about problems we'd been dealing with for years. I was just defending what was legally mine, but I'm glad it helped others too. The neighborhood's better now. People actually talk to each other at the mailboxes instead of being afraid someone will report them for a violation. It feels like a community instead of a surveillance state." After Jennifer and Emma left, I sat on my back porch with a beer and looked out at the livestock area. The electric fence hummed its low, barely audible tone. The chickens pecked around their freshly rebuilt coop. The goats had claimed the highest point of their climbing structure and were surveying their domain like tiny, bearded monarchs. It had been a long, expensive, frustrating fight. I'd spent thousands on legal fees, lost time from work dealing with meetings and investigations, and watched my chickens die because someone couldn't accept that county zoning laws existed for a reason. But I'd won. The law had worked the way it was supposed to, protecting property owners' rights against HOA overreach. My phone buzzed with an email from the county clerk's office. Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, had filed updated covenants that explicitly acknowledged agricultural zoning rights for properties over 1 acre, and included clear language about not interfering with county-permitted land uses. The new board wasn't taking any chances on a repeat of the Patricia situation. I texted Brenda, "Updated covenants filed, looks good." Her response came back quickly, "Excellent. That should prevent future issues. Enjoy your farm." It wasn't really a farm, not in the traditional sense, but it was mine, legal, and exactly what I'd wanted when I'd left the city. No HOA president, no matter how determined or delusional, could take that away as long as county zoning and state law remained on my side. Marcus texted in the evening asking if I wanted to grab dinner in Fort Collins. We met at a burger place on College Avenue and spent an hour talking about everything except HOAs. He'd replanted his front yard garden, this time even bigger than before, and was planning to can vegetables all summer. "Feels good to grow food where people can see it," he said. Like a statement that we're not all going to bow down to suburban conformity. "It's just tomatoes, Marcus. It's principle. Same as your goats." He had a point. This whole situation had never really been about livestock or electric fences or even property values. It had been about control, fear of change, and one person's inability to accept that not everyone wanted to live in a sterile, regulation-obsessed environment. Over the summer, I fell into a comfortable routine. My remote software work funded the lifestyle while the animals provided entertainment, food, and a connection to something more tangible than code. I sold alpaca wool to local fiber artists. The chickens produced more eggs than I could eat, so I traded them with neighbors for vegetables, baked goods, and other homemade items. The neighborhood felt different now. People stopped by to see the animals, ask questions about raising livestock, or just chat by the fence. Kids loved the goats, who were natural entertainers always willing to perform for an audience. A few other homeowners started talking about getting chickens themselves, now that they knew it was legal and the HOA wouldn't cause problems. In August, I got a letter from Patricia's attorney. She wanted to apologize in person as part of her probation requirements. I wasn't required to meet with her, but I was curious, so I agreed. We met at a neutral location, a park bench at the Fossil Creek Reservoir. Patricia looked different, thinner and older than I remembered. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she started. "I know I don't deserve your time after everything I did. Your attorney said this is part of your probation." "It is, but I wanted to do it anyway." "Mr. Irving, I owe you an enormous apology. What I did was wrong on every level. The harassment, the stalking, and especially killing your chickens. There's no excuse for any of it." I didn't say anything, just waited for her to continue. "I've been in therapy, dealing with a lot of issues I should have addressed years ago. My therapist helped me understand that I was projecting my childhood trauma onto the neighborhood. When my family lost our farm, it destroyed us financially and emotionally. I grew up associating anything rural or agricultural with failure and poverty. When you moved in with your livestock, it triggered something irrational in me. That still doesn't justify poisoning my animals. I know, nothing justifies that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to understand it was never really about you personally. It was about my own demons, and I let them turn me into someone I'm ashamed of." We sat in silence for a minute, watching ducks paddle around the reservoir. "I hope you're getting the help you need," I said finally. "And I hope you've learned something from this." "I have. More than I wanted to, honestly." Patricia stood up. "I'll leave you alone now. Thank you for listening." I watched her walk back to her car, a beat-up sedan that was noticeably not the silver BMW she used to drive. According to neighborhood gossip, she'd lost her job as a pharmaceutical sales rep after the arrest and was working retail while on probation. Her husband had filed for divorce. The legal fees and restitution had drained their savings. Part of me felt bad for her. She'd clearly been dealing with mental health issues that went unaddressed for years. But another part of me remembered coming home to find my chickens dead and knew that actions had consequences. She'd made choices, terrible choices, and now she was living with the results. As fall approached, I added 2 sheep to my little homestead, rescues from a farm that was downsizing. Their names were Cotton and Wool, which was admittedly uncreative, but they responded to the names, so they stuck. The sheep got along great with the alpacas and mostly ignored the goats, which was probably the best strategy for dealing with goats anyway. The new HOA board invited me to join as a member, but I politely declined. I'd seen enough of HOA politics to last a lifetime. Instead, I volunteered to help organize a neighborhood farm education day where residents could learn about raising backyard chickens, small livestock care, and sustainable gardening. The event in October drew about 50 people, including a lot of kids who were fascinated by the animals. We had demonstrations on chicken coop building, basic veterinary care, and even spinning alpaca wool. Marcus set up a table with produce from his garden and information about companion planting. "This is what the neighborhood should be," Jennifer said as we watched kids feed grass to the alpacas. People learning from each other, sharing knowledge, building community. Instead of arguing about fence colors and grass height, I agreed. Exactly. I wish we'd had the courage to stand up to Patricia years ago. Could have saved everyone a lot of trouble. Sometimes it takes the right situation to give people permission to act. My situation was clear-cut enough that it became a rallying point. The next HOA election in November was contested but civil. Jennifer won re-election as president with strong support. The new board implemented transparent procedures, regular financial audits, and a clear appeals process for any violation notices. They also created an agricultural advisory committee to help homeowners with agricultural zoning understand their rights and responsibilities. Things weren't perfect. There were still occasional disagreements about rules and enforcement. But the toxic atmosphere Patricia had created was gone, replaced by something that felt more like actual neighbors trying to maintain a pleasant community together. In December, I was invited to speak at a county planning commission meeting about agricultural zoning in residential developments. Apparently, my situation had sparked interest in how to balance suburban development with preserved agricultural use. Several developers were proposing new subdivisions that would include agricultural parcels, and they wanted input on how to structure it properly. The key is clarity from the beginning, I told the commission. My purchase agreement explicitly spelled out that agricultural use was permitted. That shouldn't have been controversial, but the HOA covenants didn't clearly acknowledge the agricultural zoning exception, which created ambiguity Patricia exploited. "What would you recommend for new developments?" one commissioner asked. "Require that HOA covenants explicitly reference and acknowledge any special zoning designations. Make it crystal clear that county zoning takes precedence. And maybe require some basic training for HOA board members on Colorado property law so they understand the limits of their authority." The commission thanked me for my input and said they'd incorporate some of my suggestions into updated subdivision regulations. It felt good to know that something positive might come out of the whole mess, that maybe future homeowners wouldn't have to go through what I did. On Christmas Eve, my parents drove up from Colorado Springs to visit. They'd been skeptical when I first told them about buying property with livestock, worried I was taking on too much or making an impractical decision. But seeing the setup in person changed their minds. "This is really nice, Samuel," my dad said as we walked around the property. "You've built something special here." "Thanks, Dad. It was touch and go for a while with the HOA situation. Your mother and I were worried when you told us about the legal issues. We didn't want to see you lose your investment or get buried in legal fees. It worked out. Expensive lesson in HOA politics, but I'm glad I fought it." My mom was inside making hot chocolate while playing with the barn cats I'd acquired to help with mice. "These animals are lucky to have you," she called out. "Everything's so well cared for." We spent the evening around the fire pit in my backyard, roasting marshmallows and watching the alpacas settle in for the night. My dad told stories about his own childhood on his grandfather's farm in Nebraska. Memories I'd heard before, but appreciated differently now, that I understood the work and satisfaction that came with caring for animals. "Your grandfather would have loved this," Dad said. He always hoped someone in the family would get back to the land eventually. As the year ended and a new one began, I reflected on everything that had happened since I'd moved to Meadowbrook Estates. It had been dramatic, expensive, and at times genuinely scary, but it had also been worth it. I had the life I wanted, raising animals and living on my own terms while still being part of a community. The electric fence continued humming its low tone, marking the boundaries of my little agricultural operation. The livestock thrived, providing wool, eggs, and entertainment. And most importantly, I'd learned that standing up for your legal rights, even when it's difficult and expensive, matters not just for you but for everyone around you who might be facing similar issues. Patricia Henderson had tried to use the HOA as a weapon to enforce her personal preferences and unresolved trauma. She'd failed because Colorado law, property rights, and eventually the justice system protected homeowners against that kind of overreach. The system worked, even if it took time and money and stress to get there. In January, I started planning an expansion of the livestock area to add a few dairy goats for making cheese. The process would require updated county permits and notification to the HOA, but this time I knew exactly what I was doing. The permits came through without issue, and the HOA acknowledged receipt of my notification without comment. One afternoon in February, exactly a year after Patricia had first shown up at my door with her clipboard and attitude, I stood at the same kitchen window where I'd been watching my goats when this all started. The scene was similar but expanded. More animals, better infrastructure, and a neighborhood that had transformed from a place of conflict into an actual community. My phone rang. It was Tom, my real estate agent. "Hey Samuel, I've got a potential client looking for property similar to yours. Mind if I bring them by to see what's possible with agricultural zoning in a residential development?" "Sure, no problem. When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow afternoon. Works for me. Fair warning, the goats are extra mischievous right now. One of them figured out how to unlatch the gate yesterday." Tom laughed. "I'll let them know it's a full farm experience." After hanging up, I realized I'd started thinking of this place as a farm without even noticing the shift. It wasn't a commercial operation, or anything close to what most people would call a real farm. But it was agricultural, productive, and mine. The next afternoon, Tom showed up with a young couple, Daniel and Michelle Foster, who were looking to leave Denver for more space and the ability to raise some animals. They spent 2 hours asking questions, taking pictures, and getting enthusiastically harassed by the goats. "This is exactly what we want," Michelle said. "But we've been scared off by stories about HOAs preventing livestock. How did you navigate that?" I gave them the full story, not sugarcoating the difficulties, but emphasizing the importance of understanding zoning laws and purchase agreements. Make sure agricultural use is explicitly permitted before you buy. Get it in writing. Have an attorney review everything. And don't assume the HOA knows or cares about county zoning law because they might not. Did you ever regret fighting the HOA instead of just removing the animals?" Daniel asked. "Not for a second. This was legally permitted. This was my property right. Giving in would have just enabled more abuse, not just toward me but toward other homeowners. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it's expensive and stressful." They thanked me for the tour and information, and Tom promised to find them something with clear agricultural rights. Watching them drive away, I hoped they'd find their own piece of land and avoid the drama I'd been through. As winter faded into early spring, the animals shed their winter coats, the chickens increased their egg production, and the neighborhood came alive with people spending more time outside. Kids rode bikes past my fence, usually stopping to say hi to the goats. Neighbors walking dogs would pause to chat about the weather, the HOA's latest newsletter, or whether I thought their yard was suitable for chickens. It was normal, pleasant, and exactly what I'd imagined when I'd first decided to leave city life behind. The HOA conflict felt like a distant memory, something that had happened but didn't define my daily experience anymore. One evening in March, I was feeding the alpacas when Marcus stopped by with a 6-pack of local craft beer. "Celebration," he announced. My front yard garden was featured in the Fort Collins Sustainability newsletter as an example of urban agriculture. They interviewed me about fighting the HOA to restore it. "That's awesome, man. Congratulations." We sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the Front Range, turning the mountains gold and purple. The animals settled in for the night, making their various sounds. Chickens clucking, goats bleating, alpacas humming their weird alien hum. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just given in when Patricia first showed up?" Marcus asked. Sometimes. I'd probably have saved $10,000 in legal fees and a lot of stress. But, but I wouldn't have this. And Patricia would still be terrorizing everyone in the neighborhood, and the HOA covenants wouldn't have been updated. Sometimes the expensive, difficult path is the right one. Deep thoughts from the goat farmer. Hey, I prefer livestock operations specialist. We laughed and finished our beers as stars started appearing in the darkening sky. The electric fence clicked softly in the background, a sound I'd grown so used to that I barely noticed it anymore. The property that had sparked months of legal battles, harassment, and eventually criminal charges was just home now. The livestock area that Patricia Henderson had tried so hard to eliminate was a permanent, protected part of the neighborhood landscape. And the HOA that had been a source of fear and frustration for so many residents was slowly transforming into something more reasonable and community-focused. It wasn't a perfect ending. There were still occasional disagreements, procedures that needed improvement, and homeowners who thought the rules should be stricter or looser depending on their preferences. But it was functional, legal, and most importantly, it respected property rights and county zoning law. As I locked up the chicken coop and made sure all the animals had fresh water for the night, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The confrontation, the legal battle, the escalating harassment, the dead chickens, the criminal investigation, and finally the resolution that had changed not just my situation, but the entire neighborhood's approach to the HOA. It had been worth it. Every difficult conversation, every dollar spent on legal fees, every sleepless night worrying about what Patricia might do next. It had been worth it because standing up for what was right, even when it was hard, mattered. The electric fence hummed on, marking the boundaries of my legal, properly zoned, county-approved livestock operation. And somewhere in the evening air, I could hear my goats settling down for the night, blissfully unaware that they'd been at the center of a suburban property rights battle that had changed a community. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued, different than before but better for the struggle. And my little piece of agricultural land in a residential neighborhood stood as a reminder that HOAs, no matter how determined, couldn't override county zoning law or property rights. Some lessons are learned the hard way, and this neighborhood had definitely learned theirs.